we are going to learn a little bit more about the formula that we use to solve quadratic equations. Here I show you the formula, the quadratic equation again. This is what a quadratic equation looks like. The formula to find the values for x. This is what we learned in the previous lesson. I need you to know that the x values that we find are actually called roots. So when we solve a quadratic equation by finding the possible x values, we're actually finding the roots. So from now on, I'm going to try to call them roots instead of solutions to the equation. I'll try not to call them the possible x values again. I'll try to use the word roots. We call them the roots of the equation. Okay. So we worked a little bit with this formula to find the roots of a quadratic equation. Notice the square root bit in this formula. This square root part is going to tell us a lot about the possible roots that we find. Certain things we know about taking square roots will give us extra information. Let's remember what we know about square roots. Taking the square root of 0, the square root of 0 is always going to be 0. Whether it's a positive 0 or a negative 0, it's still the same value. It's still 0, right? So there's only one possible answer. Taking the square root of a positive number, like say, let me just give an example. Square root of 49. 49 is a positive number. When we take the square root of that, our answer could be 7 or negative 7, right? 7 times 7 is 49. Negative 7 times negative 7 is also 49. So the square root of a positive number could be either one of these two, or it's actually both of these positive numbers. The square root of a negative number, can we find any number that when we square it gives us a negative answer? Well, really, we can't. Like say the square root of negative 36. Well, it's not 6 because 6 times 6 is positive 36. It's not negative 6 because negative 6 times negative 6 is also a positive 36. There's no way we could take the square root of a negative number. So here, it's just no answer. No answer. No solution. So what does this tell us about finding the roots of a quadratic equation when we look at only this bit? So before we plug all our values into this entire equation, we could look at just this part and say, well, if we're taking the square root of a positive, then we'll find two roots. We'll find two roots. If in this equation we're taking the square root of a negative number, like this here turns out to be negative, what does that tell us? It tells us there are no roots. And we cry. If this bit under here turns out to be 0 and we're taking the square root of 0, there's only one answer for that, either positive or negative. It'll be 0. So there's only one possible value for x here, so only one root. So if we have a quadratic equation and before we try to do all the other stuff, we look at this part, b squared minus 4ac, this bit that is under the square root symbol. If we look at this bit, plug in our values, calculate it, we'll know before we do anything else whether there's even going to be any roots, and if so, if there's going to be 1 root or 2 root. So this bit in the formula is a very important piece that gives us a lot of information, which is why they gave it its own name. It's called the discriminant. This bit decides whether it's going to have no roots, 1 root, or 2 roots. Pretty cool.